All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Brian Estrada. He is the Associate Dean and College Admissions Director at the Providence Academy in Plymouth, Minnesota, just outside of Minneapolis. And Brian's got some great expertise with college admissions because of his background actually doing that piece of the job. So I'm going to let you, Brian, just give a little bit of a quick background on that and what led you now into the other side and kind of how it's been a cool balance for you. And then we're going to get into some really cool questions that are pertinent for what's going on right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, starting with what I do right now, I'm, as you mentioned, I serve as a college counselor at a college preparatory school in Minnesota called Providence Academy, just a short distance from Minneapolis. And I've been here for 7 years working very close at hand with students who are in the upper school here, especially juniors and seniors on their college planning and college application process. And prior to taking this job, I was a college admissions officer for a total of 9 years. I was at Dartmouth College immediately prior to this, in New Hampshire, serving as an admissions officer, and then prior to that was at Vanderbilt University in Nashville, Tennessee. So combined with the fact that I grew up in Texas and I've lived in these places, I guess I have a lot of regional experiences
Nice.
that my life has included. But it's been a very rewarding, transition for me to go from the college admissions setting, being a part of the process of recruiting students to excellent colleges and being a part of the application review process and that kind of philosophical work that goes into how those places differentiate among really excellent applicants, to being on this side of the equation and working with students who are preparing, their applications for those review processes. So
Right.
I think I have, a pretty good view of both sides of that.
Well, and that's why we wanted you to join us today, because we've got some really kind of focused questions on what college admissions officials are looking for from that standpoint, and then even what you are telling your current students with this craziness of life that's happening right now on how that's changing things. So first thing I wanted to bring up is, obviously for Altruize, we're all about the community service and trying to capture that data to make it easier for students to submit that with their applications, kind of that volunteer resume, if you will. But we don't want to lighten what the grades do. So when as a college admissions official, the community service is important. How important are the grades themselves in the totality of your decision making, along with SAT, ACT scores, which we will talk about later, what schools are doing with that. But what does that look like in its completeness?
Yeah, it is interesting how this notion of of being engaged in community service, which I will certainly never speak ill of, and as important as it is, but this notion of being engaged in community service as something to do, so colleges will see it, or it's kind of part of part of preparing to be an attractive college applicant. I mean, it's interesting how that's very common and kind of omnipresent, and then the contrast between that and how how college admissions processes and the evaluation of candidates actually works is there's some discrepancy there, to the degree that colleges, in the way they select students, I mean, it is very, very much tied to academic performance, and and grades are just always at the top of the pyramid, decision-making pyramid, whether you're at an Ivy League institution or a flagship state university, or a small, kind of a small private college. It's always grades first, and the thing is, at many places, it's only grades. Out of 2,400 colleges in the United States, I mean, there are about, we'll just call it about 100 places that are kind of truly selective, and at that, where they actually they actually actively make their admissions decisions on the basis not just of grades, but they also have to consider all of the other dimensions of a candidacy. So we call that holistic admissions. That happens at really a minority, a drastic minority of colleges, actually. So a lot of colleges are on a system that we might call formulaic admissions. So at those institutions, the admissions committee or the faculty have established a threshold, a hurdle, if you will, and of minimum academic credentials needed for admission. And those colleges can accept every applicant who clears that hurdle. So GPA, high school GPA, high school grades, and historically at least, standardized testing would be the main things that would feed that decision. Your
Right.
accomplishments beyond the classroom wouldn't have much bearing on admission. Now, they could have bearing on maybe honors college acceptance or maybe higher level scholarships and those kinds of things. But then you have some formulaic admissions on to one side, and then holistic admissions on the other side. Holistic admissions will be the procedure used at those colleges that cannot admit every applicant who clears a particular academic threshold, because there's more applicants who do that than there's space in the class. So the admissions decisions will tend to be determined on the basis of some of those other dimensions that a candidacy might have, especially extracurricular strength. We would include community service in that, and the other intangibles that that an applicant might be presenting. So it is, the number one predictor, just to not overthink it, is if you've really thrived as a high school student with your grades, that's the number one clue that that you might be able to aspire to to the most competitive universities.
Sure.
If that's not been your academic background, I mean, one I would never discourage a student from aspiring and maybe applying, but you have an uphill battle when the grades aren't there, even if other aspects of your candidacy are going to be really strong.
So you brought up, I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit in our questions. You brought it up already, and I think it's so important to talk about, especially now with the environment that we have going on. Already more and more schools were going to that test optional or test blind scenario. And what do you see, first of all, if you don't mind kind of explaining what those are, and then what do you see kind of the current environment leading to? Because one of the things that in our research we found that over 60% of college admissions officials use community service as a tiebreaker. So do you see that community service will become, or could potentially become, more important because of COVID, strangely enough?
Yeah. Well, and maybe just kind of tackle tackle the test optional movement first, and then move into that question. I mean, so just to recap, kind of what has happened is that the coronavirus really began to impact our lives, as we all recall, in March of this year. So for 11th graders, for students who just completed 11th grade this past school year, it really began to have an impact right as they were probably going to begin sitting for the ACT. Like, they might have had plans to do that late in junior year, or maybe sometime this summer, and so this created a real problem for colleges, over the overwhelming number of whom have always required a college entrance exam score to apply.
Right.
There's been a kind of a vanguard of colleges that were test optional, who had come out and said some years ago that you do not have to have an ACT or SAT result in order to apply to our school, but that was a very small number of schools relative to the whole. So as testing did not happen in April, and then in May, and then in June, and most recently, there was a summer ACT date just last Saturday, And by and large, every test center was canceled, then too. You have a group of now rising seniors who, a majority of whom don't have a testing result. And so colleges have been reacting to this by announcing that at least temporarily, they will be test optional. So for the class of 2021, and some colleges have said just for this next year, we're test optional. We'll think about future years later. Other colleges have said it's a 3-year kind of trial. So for the next 3 years, they won't be requiring tests because they want to see if they can, if they can operate their admissions process without testing. Because testing, even before this, wasn't the most popular thing in the college world. Because of dynamics involving inequities surrounding testing. So anyway, they sort of lit a match in a room that I was already filled with a lot of gas about the future of testing. So now so juniors who are approaching this process may find themselves applying without testing, without test scores to colleges that are now test optional. And the statistics that I've seen, is that over half of all colleges have announced that they are test optional at this point. It's 60 of the top 100 universities in the U.S. News rankings. It's 85 of the top 100 liberal arts colleges in the U.S. News rankings. So it's touching, it is touching those most competitive colleges, as well as colleges that have, maybe higher acceptance rates. So it's going to be a fascinating year. Fascinating is one word for it. Unpredictable would be another word for it. And I think coming from the perspective of having read files, having been on admissions committees, I think that those colleges that have never been test optional prior to this year are going to have real challenges because of the way that those scores could help them maybe come to conclusions about applicants a little more quickly. They're not going to have that luxury anymore. But other things are going to have to become more important. If you're going to remove testing from the decision-making pie, every other piece of the pie will have to grow a little larger. So we might say there'll be even more emphasis on high school grades, and probably more than grades, or even as much as grades, high school rigor. So like this notion of have you been advancing in all academic areas towards more advanced work? There'll probably be more of a premium on that. So it's not just how many academic units have you accumulated, but have you been progressing from Spanish 1 to 2 to 3 to 4?
Interesting.
Have you been progressing through the English curriculum to the to the more demanding senior level English? Have you been doing math? And math is a big one where students sometimes take a variety of journeys. Have you been sort of progressing upward? So I think that those will be the signs that colleges are looking for absent testing. We might say that recommendations, for colleges that use recommendations, they're going to, they will take on even more weight, and especially because this past academic year was so unusual. It included that huge disruption when everyone transitioned to distance learning, and so colleges are going to be curious, especially for the class of 2021. Of just knowing understanding what happened in that school and with the classroom instruction that student experienced. But that's kind of a little bit to the side, and then we come to extracurricular aspects, and I think that at the most competitive colleges that do care very deeply about extracurricular activities, this notion of having a story of a student presenting in their application a kind of coherent a coherent story and narrative about themselves. The extracurricular piece has always been a big part of that. If they've been deeply engaged in community service, and maybe in the ways that they might be through your program, where they can really point tangibly towards sort of the extent of that commitment and kind of the depth the depth to which they've been involved in it. It probably does have the potential at those places that are really paying attention to extracurriculars to play a bigger role. That's definitely true.
Okay. Yeah, that's interesting that, I find that really interesting that you said part of that's going to be the rigor
Hmm.
of, like, you know, so that student might want to reconsider if they were happy with their B in freshman math to still continue with math even through sophomore, junior,
Yeah.
senior year, just to make sure that they're showing that they're trying
Yeah.
to progress through. That's interesting.
Yeah. And if younger students are hearing this, who are still in ninth and 10th grade, if you're, one takeaway from the situation is if you are really excelling in school, but not necessarily taking many advanced classes, or kind of on the fence of whether do you really want to, maybe challenge yourself a bit more, knowing, well, you might have to do a little more homework, you might be opening yourself up to a little more risk of a lower grade. I mean, when you don't have you're not going to be able to present a test score that might be some sort of assessment of your cognitive abilities. The rigor is going to be the way you prove, that you're a really capable student. So
Yeah.
if you're feeling like you have excess capacity, like I'm able to make A's without working too hard. Well, you might really want to um, think about strategically, like, starting to challenge yourself a bit more, because there could really be benefits to that in terms of making you sort of a stronger candidate
Right.
for colleges down the road.
So, and I'm assuming then that rigor then kind of will probably translate, I mean, you touched on it a little bit, to their community service,
Hmm.
making sure their community service isn't kind of a flash in the pan just to do it, but if they can show a progression or something that they've been learning or leading
Hmm.
then in their community service, that will help that much more, give more weight to
Yeah.
that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think some students, not all students, but some are susceptible to, um, to sort of an approach to their extracurricular life where they just feel like they need to cover a lot of bases. I'm going to kind of touch community service, make sure I'm doing a little bit of that. I'm going to touch athletics. I have, do some of that. I'm going to be involved in some arts activities. Like there is that kind of resume filler type of student, and I don't use that as a negative, because those are students who make high school happen. Like
Right.
they're just sort of, their hands are everywhere, and they're ubiquitous, and it's lovely. It can be maybe a disappointment to those students at the end of high school with respect to college admissions, and what matters. Like they look back and say, well, I've done a lot, but I didn't have a deep impact anywhere. And that's something about, I think, the way really competitive colleges are thinking about extracurriculars is not just, it is not a matter uh, of participation, but they're really kind of looking at any student and saying, okay, well, where has their um, where has their deeper achievement come in?
Right.
And so, and that's where it could be helpful to encourage, again, students who are at the younger end of high school and who still have time, uh, to kind of get to this level. It is helpful to make a choice in something and try to really invest in it, to where you have at the end of at the end of 4 years, something a little more substantive and deep that's happened there. So if you've done, um, if you've been on in a varsity athletic program all of high school, have you been committed enough to it to maybe be a captain by the time you're a junior or senior, as opposed to simply
Sure.
having been, on the team or in the program? If you've been working, a part-time job, since 10th grade, have you been committed enough to that to where maybe you've, been promoted, or you've been kind of invited to be, help train new hires, something like that. If you've been in
Yeah.
band, have you, did you work on your, on your craft to maybe be in the all-state band, or, kind of, or to really kind of accomplish some things, artistically. If it's been community service, it's, it isn't just a huge count of hours that would be impressive, but if you, have you used that time to maybe organize something new, or to pull other people in, to plan, to plan events or to raise awareness? Have you had that? Have you had an impact at kind of that level? And if you have, those will be the things that are going to, that a college admissions officer are going to sort of take away from an application, make a note of, and be able to sort of, package that into the ways that they would advocate for your admission,
Gotcha.
to their colleagues, to the admissions committee, so that's thinking about where that depth is coming from. And it doesn't matter what it is. Again, it doesn't matter if it's in community service, it doesn't have to be that, but it needs to come from somewhere.
Right, right. And that's a great point, because unless you truly have a student that kind of wants to experience it all and
Mhm.
dabble in everything while they can, that's one type of personality that's true to that personality. They really want to kind of test the waters before they dive in deep to something. But to your point, and I think it's good though then for those who aren't athletic, who aren't musically inclined, to know that community service could still have that same look and feel for that college admissions official, should they find something that they're passionate about and can commit to it at the same level that, the person on the basketball team did as well, kind of thing. So I think that's great.
Yeah.
Any closing thoughts? Anything that you
Well, I think that, what I would encourage students to, to keep in mind is kind of what you just said, which is that the path towards a really strong, a really strong application, or a really strong candidacy, a really interesting extracurricular profile, it is open to everyone. It is not only open to students who do particular things. And it is one of those common things that you will hear, or that I will hear, in early meetings with students, is that, well, because I don't, because I'm not much of an arts person, and I don't do athletics, I'm, I just don't have a lot to talk about, or to offer, or I'm just not sure I'm not sure where my niche is. And and I think that it's sort of one of those things, like, on the contrary, not to shy away from those things, athletics and arts, but what we might say about those things are that those are things that a very high percentage of high school students are engaged in. At every high school, everywhere, those are the main extracurricular activities, and it's wonderful and it's beautiful, and you can tell there's those students who are going to really thrive in those things. But boy, if you have some other interest you can pursue, you're almost, like, by definition, going to be a little more unique and a little more, that could be the student that just really does stand out a little more, as part of that, as someone who could be a part of the variety that competitive colleges are seeking in the communities that they are building.
Sure.
So, with tools that are out there to sort of reach other people, like, if you, by making a podcast, or starting to make videos on YouTube, or to, or to sort of, pursue, interesting intellectual side projects, which you can do so much more easily because you have the resources to kind of access anything.
right?
The possibilities are endless, and you just have to have, kind of a curious mindset and a desire to sort of, to delve deeper into something, and it's all there. It's all possible.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Brian. I really appreciate it. And good luck with the upcoming school year. Hearts and prayers are with you guys. So with all the teachers and faculty.
Yeah.
So thank you again for all you do.
Well, for all students who are wondering about back to school plans and wondering what their year will look like, whether it's we're going to start out distance learning where you live, or you're going to have the opportunity to come back to school. Just make the most of it. Do your best. Know that especially colleges are going to understand what's happened in your community and in your life, and just lean on your resources. Lean on your school counselor. I put a plug for that, or a college counselor if your school has one, and lean on the folks who work in admissions at the colleges that really interest you. It is their job to sort of see you through the process as an applicant, and to answer your questions. So lean on your resources now more than ever.
Yeah, great advice. Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.
All right, thank you, Nicole.
Yep.